What
Ah,
are you seeing?
I am seeing the PowerPoint slides. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, that works
Now
for
you're
me.
seeing it?
I am seeing it. Yes.
Okay. I have
How much time?
35 minutes.
Oh, okay, then we should probably be fine. We'll just
All
go
right.
straight through it. Okay?
All right. Hang on. I'm going to, yeah, it should be all right. I'm going to just open up the window. All right. Okay. I'm ready.
Okay, so then I
So it's,
will yeah, so I'll hide myself from the broadcast here in just 1 second. But so this is just Ryan doing the introduction and then turning it over to you. Okay?
all right. And you say when.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Ryan. And hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. Uh, I am the rail and intermodal expert here at FTR, and it's my job today to give you a picture of what's happening out there in the rail environment. And we'll spend a little bit of time covering what's happening with rail carload. Then we'll shift over to the intermodal picture, and then we'll finish up with some time for Q&A. So it's a very interesting time in the rail environment right now. Things have changed quite a bit here in the recent weeks, particularly as we moved out of the first quarter and into the second quarter. Things have really turned downhill in a pretty significant way, and the first time in many years, basically since the big recession, that carloads have gone negative. And as you can see on this slide, what we're presenting, the AAR puts out every week the rail carload figures. It's probably the closest thing to real time that we have in terms of a view of what's happening in the industrial economy. Is what's happening with rail carload, because it's put out in a very timely fashion. And what you're looking at here is a 4-week moving average of the total rail car loads, excluding intermodal, for North America, as reported by the AAR. And that's that yellow line. And then the red bars show what the year-over-year difference is between 2015 and 2014. And what you can see from those red bars is that we moved into the red, into the negative, by about the end of February, and it has consistently remained there, with the year-over-year deficit getting down to a very significant level, close to 10%. But we have seen a little bit of an upturn in recent weeks, and the year-over-year deficit has started to narrow, but we're still looking at a very significant deficit going into the middle part of August of somewhere in the vicinity of 6 to 7%. So this is quite a turnabout from where we were earlier on, where consistently we were seeing growth. And if you go back to 2014, enough growth that it was causing some operational issues with the railroad. If we look at the individual commodities, and the AAR tracks 20 individual commodities on this busy chart, you can see those listed across the bottom. And what we're showing here are really two things. One is in the yellow bars, what the absolute difference is in the carloads moved over the last 10 weeks this year versus last year, and that was through the beginning of August. And the blue bars show the percentage change in the movement of each particular commodity. So you can see that some of the commodities are fairly significantly down on a year-over-year basis, and the one I want to call your attention to is coal, down 16%. Metallic ores, another big mover, down 17%. But as you can tell from all of the bars that are pointing down, and only a few bars pointing up, the weakness that we are seeing in rail carload is quite widespread across almost all commodities. If you look at the extreme right-hand side of this chart, there's a yellow bar that says 362,000, and that's the number of carloads fewer that were moved over the last 10 weeks this year versus last year. And of that, 266,000 of those reduced carloads were in the form of reduced coal shipments. And so coal is a very, very important component in terms of the weakness that we're seeing in rail carload, but it is actually quite widespread across a lot of different commodities. And what this is telling us is that the industrial sector of our economy is experiencing something of a slowdown right now. And so to the extent that the recovery continues, it's going to be on the back of the consumer more so than the industrial economy. Here's a little bit of detail on what's happening in the coal situation. And frankly, FTR was as surprised as everybody else in the business at the extremely sharp decline that we saw earlier in this year with regard to coal shipments. And coal is a very, very important commodity in terms of the rail carload picture, the largest individual commodity in terms of carloads moved. And you can see that by that yellow line, a very sharp downturn in coal movements, with the year-over-year deficit bottoming out at somewhere in the high teens. What's causing this? Well, it's a combination of things, most primarily low-priced natural gas, and that's causing substitution of natural gas-fired electrical generating capacity for coal. Secondly, of course, the environmental regulations that are weighing on the coal generating picture and causing utilities to shutter coal-fired power plants in favor of natural gas. And the forward coal situation is also extremely weak right now. That's both due to the weak economies overseas, including China and Europe, as well as the strong dollar, which is tending to make our coal exports a little less competitive with other international sources of coal, such as Colombia. So let's say we take out the special situations, and by that I'm referring to three main areas: the coal, which we just covered; grain, which always moves according to its own requirements, depending on what the harvest is, but grain is not necessarily an indicator of what's happening in the economy. And then the third is crude by rail, which of course has been affected by the downturn in crude oil prices. Last year was a major contributor. This year, last year in additional carloads. This year is a bit of a drag, but again, not an indication of what's happening in the economy. Let's take all those out and see what's going on. And that's what you're seeing here in this slide, is the all other category. And you can see that the message here with regard to that industrial economy is still, even if we pull out these special situations, rather troubling, with declines in the low single digits. So this is again an indication of overall weakness in the economy. Michael, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Hello? Hey, Michael?
All right, yeah.
You know, it crapped out. Now it came back.
Okay, I think it was fine on my end. Are you still on the excluded poll?
Yes.
Slide?
Can you cut it out?
What? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. We can edit it.
Yeah, but it sort of froze up. The screen went white.
Oh my God.
Then it came back.
I did not see your screen go white, I don't think, on my end. So.
All right. So can we keep going, or do I have to start over?
No. You should be able to keep going.
All right.
Maybe just count to 5 and start again.
Ready? Well, all right. So I'll start on the next slide. Right.
Okay.
There are some rays of light to all of this. One of those is in crushed stone, sand, and gravel. Now, this is an area where previously we saw some very strong growth in the earlier part of the year. we were seeing very strong growth because of the frac sand that was moving. But then as energy prices went down and drilling activity came to a relative halt, the frac sand movements declined, and we saw a precipitous decline in this category. And that bottomed out about the end of the first quarter. But since then, we have seen actually some acceleration here. And we don't think that what's happening here is frac sand, but rather an indication that perhaps the normal traditional construction that traditionally has driven this commodity is starting to take hold. And so we find that increase in the yellow line somewhat encouraging, even though it hasn't been sufficient to turn the overall year-over-year numbers into the black yet. On the construction side, the flip side of the coin is lumber and wood products, which typically is fairly closely tied to single-family home construction, and we had hoped to see a continuation of the kinds of improvement that we saw in the early part of the year, but unfortunately, it has started to fall off and has become a source of weakness rather than strength. So this is really not a favorable sign from what we see. Grain carloads, it would be very difficult for grain to provide a significant boost to our current carload situation, simply because last year the grain harvest was so very, very strong. So the best we can do here is hope that it's going to match last year's robust shipments, and so far it looks like that's happening. And we've actually, after a period of deficit, have moved back into a surplus in terms of growth in carloads of grain moved this year versus last. You know, there's a phrase out there that's called the rail renaissance, and that certainly has been true with regard to the financial condition of the rail industry. But if there has been a renaissance, it has not been in the form of increased volume. And this rather busy chart shows what the 2014 volume was versus 2006, which was the height of rail carload movement. That's when rail carload volume peaked. And if there are more carloads moving of a commodity in 2014 than 2006, that's printed in green. And if there are less, it's printed in red. At the bottom of it all, you can see that, in fact, in 2014, 1.17 million fewer carloads were moved versus 2006. And that weakness was distributed across a wide variety of commodities. And of course, now we're saying that 2015 is actually lower than 2014. So it's going to be even perhaps a little bit more extreme when we get to the 2015 numbers. So if there's a renaissance, it hasn't been in terms of volume. It's been elsewhere, and those two places are in terms of revenue, in the form of rates, and the reduced cost. The railroads have been operating more efficiently than they were back in 2006. But it seems very likely to us at this point that rail carload will, in fact, never during this cycle regain the levels that it experienced prior to the economic Great Recession back in 2008 and 9. So most likely it's going to take to the next economic cycle after the next downturn for us to get back to those heights. Service is another issue right now on the railroad docket, and we saw a somewhat severe decline in rail service in terms of the two metrics that the railroads report. One is average train speed, and the other is yard dwell time, which simply refers to the amount of time that the rail cars spend in the yard being switched from one train to another. So obviously with speed, the higher the better, the faster the trains are running, the better. With yard dwell time, it's the opposite. The lower the amount of time spent in the yards, the better. Each is a measure of the velocity of the national railroad network. And if you look at this chart, which goes back 2 years, the green line is the average train speed and the blue line is yard dwell. And back in 2013, 2014, we saw a rather significant deterioration in these statistics as the rail network began to bog down as a result of both overall volume increase as well as special issues, for instance, with regard to crude by rail and where it was moving, which lines it was traveling over, and those lines in particular may not have been set up for the extra volume. And as a result, the things started to slow down. And you can see that in both of these lines, the blue line going up with the amount of time spent in the yards, the green line coming down. Now, we have seen in 2015 a very gradual improvement in these measures. But as you can look on the right, you can see that we are only about a third of the way back to where we were 2 years ago. And this is really a little bit puzzling given the fact that rail volume is down. I would have expected to see somewhat more of a recovery than we've seen to date. And so we're going to be watching this very closely, but hopefully the railroads will start to be able to see some real concrete improvement, and we'll get back more to the level of where we were 2 years ago, which would be welcome both from a shipper standpoint, but also in terms of rail economics, because generally the faster the network is moving, the more economical and efficient it is, because they're making the best use of their crews and locomotives and cars, all of which are achieving more miles, more ton miles per day, per week, per month. We'll just get to the next slide. So here is our projection. Looking forward, we're looking at a decline, a rather significant decline in 2015 in excess of 4% versus 2014, and only getting about 25% of that decline back in 2016. So the picture is quite grim. We think 2015 will be over 5% lower than 2000 mentioned earlier. That means we will back to pre-recession levels during this economic cycle. So let's intermodal, and here as well there is some issues on the table. The AAR numbers for intermodal, which come out every week, indicate that there is an overall slowdown occurring. Yes.
Sorry, yes. There was a lag on that last slide, and then I lost you for a couple of seconds. It was just only on that last slide.
Which slide?
No, not the intermodal slowdown, but the one before that.
Tell me when you see it.
Yeah, this one though, the 2015 volume.
So you want me to repeat this?
Yeah, can you just start from here and repeat this one? It just all of a sudden it totally cut out.
Okay, so I'll just pretend I'm just starting on this slide.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So here is our projection for what 2015 and 2016 will look like. We are calling for a decline of over 4% in carloads this year versus last, with only a fraction of that being made up in 2016. And as previously discussed, we'll end up at 2015, at the end of 2015, over 5% lower than we were prior to the start of the recession. So during this entire recovery, it appears pretty likely that we'll never get back to pre-recession levels in terms of rail carloads. And it's going to take till after the next downturn for us to achieve that. Now let's turn over to intermodal and take a look at what's happening over there. And here also there are some issues with regard to volume. We're seeing a bit of a slowdown. The AAR reports it every week. The 4-week moving average through the middle of August is now running somewhere below 2% growth year over year. And by historical standards, that's pretty low for intermodal, even though we're still in the black. Traditionally, we have been growing at a considerably higher rate than that. So there's more to the intermodal story that we need to take a look at, and let's dive into that. Typically in the past, domestic intermodal, and that refers to the movement of 53-foot domestic containers and trailers, has been a higher growth area than international, which refers to the movement of 20-foot and 40-foot, and to a limited extent 45-foot international ISO containers. Domestic has been the growth star during the course of this entire recovery. International typically has lagged, but that has not really been the case of late. Of course, we had a lot of turbulence on the international side earlier in the year because of the difficulties on the West Coast with the ports and the port labor situation. That really only got settled at the end of February. We saw a big jump in international movements of containers as that backlog that was tied up on the West Coast broke loose finally. But since then, it's actually been sustained up at that level, which is pretty unusual and indicates that perhaps there is really some underlying growth here. Mostly, I think, in the form of imports that are being driven by the relatively strong position of the U.S. consumer and also the strong dollar. However, if you look at the green line, which is domestic, we're seeing actually a very sort of quiet situation here with regard to domestic growth in terms of seasonally adjusted movements. So that indicates to us that maybe there's a bit of a slowdown occurring on the domestic side. And here you see a different look of the same data, looking at it on a year-over-year basis, and very clearly international, which is the blue, exceeding the growth of domestic, which is in green. And the intermodal is roughly divided 50-50 between international and domestic. One of the things that had been occurring for quite some time is that the average length of haul of domestic intermodal has been declining. And that has been a function of the fact that intermodal has been successfully penetrating at the shorter lengths of haul. But what this chart shows, and in particular focus on the green line, which is the domestic average length of haul, as well as the dotted yellow line that provides the long-term trend, you can see that that decline in length of haul has really flattened out. And intermodal, it appears, is having difficulty at this point in making additional further penetration in the shorter lengths of haul. And why is that occurring? Well, there are several reasons. One is that there is now adequate truck capacity out there to meet the requirements. It's still relatively tight, somewhere in the 95% capacity utilization range, but adequate. The snapback on the hours of service regulations that was mandated by Congress back at the end of last year has put some additional capacity and truck capacity back on the road. The intermodal headwinds also include lower fuel prices, which hurts intermodal's economics vis-a-vis truck. The intermodal service, which has also had some difficulties along the lines of the same as rail carload that we talked about earlier, and we'll mention that in a few moments. Those are all headwinds that intermodal has to fight domestically, and we're seeing some of the effects of that, I believe. Another issue that's affecting intermodal is which port are the international shipments from Asia and from Europe coming into? Are they coming into the West Coast or the East Coast? Now, this is a rather busy chart, which is intended to show the effects of that West Coast disruption. And the West Coast year-over-year change in volume is shown on the red lines, with the thick red line being total volume. The thinner red line with the squares is imports, and the dashed red line with the circles is exports. You can see that with the exception of March, which is the the month in which all of that backlog that was tied up moved. With that exception, things are generally in the red with regard to West Coast ports through June, whereas the green lines are the corresponding volumes for East Coast ports, and those are typically running ahead of last year. And so what that's an indication of is the diversion of freight that has occurred that used to come into the West Coast and is now coming into the East Coast, either via the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal. And it looks like that change is having some legs. It looks like it's persisting even after things have returned to a semblance of normalcy on the West Coast. There's still diversion that's occurring to the East Coast. That's a long-term phenomena, and actually doesn't really work to intermodal's benefit, because the tendency is for the length of haul off the East Coast to be a bit shorter than off the West Coast, and therefore a little bit less intermodal friendly, and perhaps a little bit more amenable to straight truck movement. Having said all that, one of the things that FTR uniquely tracks is intermodal market share. And here you can see that we saw a big jump in intermodal market share in Q2. And what was behind that? Well, the gains were driven by that big backlog of volume breaking loose on the international side. The green line, which shows you the domestic portion of that share increase, is flat from Q1 to Q2, indicating that there really was no gain. You can see that there has been an underlying trend for increasing domestic share over a number of years, but there is some preliminary indication here that that may be flattening out. Total intermodal share, if I go back to the previous slide, you can see we're running somewhere in the 18 to 19% range, and what we're measuring against here is the movement of long-haul dry van type truck transportation, 550 miles or more. So here's our projection for the intermodal picture. We're looking at continued growth, but a little bit more modest than it has been. In 2015, we're projecting will come in at a total growth rate of about 4.3%, with international slightly exceeding domestic in terms of year-over-year growth, and further deceleration in 2016 down to perhaps 3.8%. Once again, domestic perhaps a slight acceleration. In 2016, we think things are going to look pretty based on the expected tightening as a result of the regulatory drag that's currently going to be imposed. Things like speed limiters and e-logs are going to come into effect, and that's going to significantly tighten up truck capacity, and that will work to intermodal's benefit, assuming there's not an economic downturn that helps blunt the capacity shortage. So with that, Ryan, that remarks, I'll turn it back over to you, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Larry. Wait,
So-
do you have time to answer a couple questions?
I do, and I just was able to get it onto the onto that screen.
Oh, great. Okay, perfect.
So are you seeing the Q&A screen now?
I am.
All right, so I just opened up your the questions that you gave me. I'll do a few here.
Honestly, I think because this has been this was a bit longer, so probably just even two of them will be fine, and then we can say we're out of time. So
Okay.
with Ryan stuff.
All right, ready to go?
No, that's it. So I'll just hide myself, and you can start in a second.
Okay. So the first question that I see here is one that regards retail inventory levels. And there is some concern as to the current levels, which are somewhat elevated. And what are the implications? Do we expect to see a movement back down to 2013, 2014 levels? And if so, what does that mean for intermodal? And our view is that we are going to see a movement part of the way back down to 2013, 2014, but not all the way. And the reason is because there is more uncertainty and lower velocity in the supply chain, and importers in particular are having to build more inventory into to account for that. So to the extent that that continues, that situation continues with all the turbulence in the ports, congestion, as well as on the intermodal network, we would not expect to see it go all the way back down to the previous levels. But right now, we think things are probably a little bit on the high side, so that may be a downward drag on our latter part of our 2015 second half estimates. We've tried to build that into our projections. But of course, perhaps there's always an opportunity for some variance there. Another question deals with the positive train control, or PTC, mandate that Congress imposed on the railroads. The railroads are supposed to have, at the end of this year, the positive train control installed on all of their major lines. And it's been made perfectly clear by the industry that they're not going to be able to make that deadline. So the question is, will Congress provide an extension to that PTC mandate, and if they don't, what are the implications? Will Congress be able to do it? Well, at this point, I'd say, based on previous experience, the odds of Congress being able to get anything passed right now are pretty low. So I would say it's more likely than not that the PTC mandate will not be extended. So what would the impact of that be? Well, the Federal Railroad Administration has indicated that if the mandate is not extended, that they will begin to fine the railroads for their non-compliance with the mandated requirement. And so there's some dollar impact involved from a railroad profitability standpoint if that actually were to come to pass. But in terms of any other impacts in terms of the operation of the railroads, its ability to handle freight, what the shippers would see, I think the impact will be zero. So it's really just a question of dollars and whether or not Congress is able to get its act together to reflect the reality on the ground and get an extension passed. So kind of a non-issue, I think, with regard to the listeners of this webinar. So Ryan, I see that we're just about out of time. So appreciate everybody's taking part in this webinar. I enjoyed providing the information to you, and we'll look forward to having you on another one of our FTR webinars in the near future.
Okay, great. Done. Thank you, Larry.
That was easy.
Well, it's easy once we